There's going to be no main story spoilers or anything like that in this video. It's just going to be gameplay of me in the Fade Field Zone doing side quests and open world stuff. Now then, guys, at this point that the video is out, either Borderlands is going to be out in a few hours or is out already. And I wanted to do a video, hopefully a relatively quick video, of the things that I liked and didn't like about the game now that I've got about 100 hours in it. I've had the game early for about 2 weeks, and this isn't really a review, nor is it a thing of me saying, should you buy the game or not? Because, for one, I've done sponsored content for 2K and Gearbox for Borderlands already this week, or the past week, and so I feel like my opinion for that shouldn't really be listened to too much because it's obviously going to be a bit biased. And even in this case, whilst this video isn't sponsored, I got the game early because of 2K and Gearbox giving me a review copy. So naturally, I'm very thankful for them. And so I don't want to say you should buy the game or you shouldn't buy the game. But what I did want to do is just talk about stuff that I liked about the game and didn't like. So these are in no particular order. I've played a good amount of the game, but I've also tried not to go too hard with it because I played about 160 hours of Borderlands 3 before the game even came out there to make loads of content, and I burnt myself out massively and stopped making videos. So I've tried to pace myself a bit better here. So yeah, I think the things that I wanted to start with liking this game is the gameplay loop. Whilst I said that these are in no particular order, I think this is one of the main things that I really like. I think they've done a really good job of. The seamless world stuff for Gearbox is hard to do, and we've seen a lot of games go to like open worlds over the last like decade or so. Diablo 4 is like the one that always springs to mind, which I enjoyed Diablo's 4 campaign of traveling the world, but after a certain point, once you do the campaign and you start doing endgame and leveling up, you just kind of get stuck in various zones. But the gameplay loop for Borderlands 4 is really good. And I spoke to the developers at Gamescom on this channel, actually, where they're saying, like, if you've got 15 minutes, 50 minutes, or like 15 hours to play, there should be like gameplay loops of stuff for you to do. If you've only got 15 minutes, you can go find a safe house. You can go do a couple of patrols, and maybe you're near a boss that you could just keep farming up if you want. Or if you're not really going out into the world to do stuff, the world can sometimes come to you with the likes of the world bosses, which are especially very, very cool. These are these big domes that appear, and if you go in them, a boss will spawn, and it's just kind of that typical ARPG style, I suppose, where they can just appear. It could be various types. You fight them. If you go out of the dome, they just instantly despawn, so you have to be careful. And these could even be bosses, I think, from the main story. I don't want to spoil too much, or they're like variations of it. And so, yeah, there's a great chance to just try your character in random boss battles as they come along. It gives me ideas of stuff like I'd love to see the Butcher from Diablo in a game like Borderlands, where you're just going along, just doing missions in the world, and then suddenly, like, a specific boss enemy could just appear and essentially ruin your day. That kind of stuff would be really cool. And I think that's the ambitious stuff that clearly Gearbox are trying to aim for with having this open world style. But like I said with Diablo, you kind of have this big world that you travel through for the campaign, and then you spend time in Hellgates or a dungeon that you just keep farming over and over. No doubt there's going to be a mission or something that you could do, an activity that you could just exploit by doing it over and over, and it's the quickest way to farm up. That stuff always happens. But from somebody that doesn't know that ahead of time, like, it has been good to just go out and experience the world and kind of try to do stuff and have the world distract you from showing up with bosses, or just having quests appear in front of you that you're like, okay, where does this take me? Or just the fact of like so much stuff going on. You find this area where there's a lot of minions and stuff, lots of enemies. You go fight them. Suddenly bosses spawn in that area, and then there's a Moxioncore machine that shows up saying, oh, yeah, you can just keep farming this boss if you want. It's just really nice. And when you're always trying to test out stuff on your character, it's just good to have those moments where it's like, all right, I'm just going to go actually fight this big pack of enemies before I finish this mission. It's really nice. The next thing I wanted to highlight a little bit was the music. Again, this isn't the kind of thing that's going to make you buy the game. It's more just like a compliment to the chef, I think, because Gearbox have this like dynamic music system where, depending on who you're fighting, where you're fighting, how that fight is going, the music kind of dynamically changes up to sort of fit what the hell is happening. If you're fighting order enemies, for example, these kind of like robotic, systematic minions, you have like a lot of like electronic drum and bass music. If you're fighting Rippers, which are kind of like the psychos from the previous games, you have this like rock and roll punky style because it's very like steampunky-esque with their suits and all the mechanics and stuff. And if you're fighting a mix of them, the music will sort of interchange between them. If you're getting your shit kicked in, frankly, the music's going to be more intense. And one thing that I did want to play, if you have a listen, is when a fight ends, listen to just how the music sort of fades out.
Down under!
One other thing as well is if you're fighting like sort of the wildlife, stuff like the maulers, which are kind of like skags, I suppose, and the cratches, you have some of that Borderlands 1 throat singing music, which really took me back. It was very like nostalgic to hear it, and overall I'd say that this game is closer to that Borderlands 1 style, but brought forward to like current era, because it is a very like dry sort of approach with the world, and if you go into the wrong area you run into some really scary minions. It's just honestly great, and I think for stuff like music, it's very easy to not notice it, because you want it to be in the background, right? You don't want it to be too in your face, and I think that's what the music does a really good job of. It really augments your experience without being too overpowering. And so yeah, I just kind of wanted to highlight as a thing that I really appreciated what Gearbox did. The downside of it is though is that you don't have like iconic songs in particular, because it's sort of made up of bits and pieces. So stuff like the Sanctuary music from Borderlands 3, I love that like little guitar loop bit. You don't really have those moments as much. Or at least it wasn't as noticeable for me in certain other zones, I suppose. Another thing I liked is the humor. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Borderlands 1 and sort of the writing there. And I think that the humor and the writing overall is more akin to Borderlands 1 than it is certainly for 3, but also 2. I genuinely did laugh out loud at a lot of stuff from the story. Claptrap made me laugh, which says a lot. He actually made me laugh a couple of times, maybe more so than anybody else, and he's only really in it for a short portion of the game right at the beginning. So yeah, he's something that like genuinely made me laugh, which I don't think I've ever laughed at Claptrap before. But also the Vault Hunters just having lines that they say to themselves. AMON calling people silly bastards and stuff, was the way that he does it is so whimsical and stuff. It caught me by surprise. I have to also say, like, the performances from the Vault Hunters were really, really, really good. I really liked what each of them did. I think they brought out a lot of personality for the characters, more so than any other game, I'd say. They've just been given that freedom, I suppose. Rafa especially, I just adore him. If you're a fan of the Princess Bride and Mandy Patinkin's portrayal of Inea Montoya, you're going to like Rafa. Not only because he's, like, Spanish-speaking, but just the suaveness and the rug-dash approach. It's so nice. And like AMON, because he is a character that's mostly built around the idea of like he wants to go fight vault monsters, to kill them, because the vault monsters, he was in a cult that used to worship one, they did a lot of damage, he wants to make sure it never happens again. He doesn't come out with voice lines about it often, which I didn't like to begin with, but it's like when he does mention it, when you do like unlock a vault and he says some lines there, it goes hard. It reminds me a little bit of like Christopher Eccleston's like Ninth Doctor Who, because it's like he's very cheery and his disposition is usually very bright, but he has that kind of like darker, serious side, which when it shows, you're like, okay, this is a really cool character. And he's not interacting off of anything really, he's just talking to himself. So again, from the Vault Hunters, when we first saw them and everybody was complaining about how bland and boring they were, to now, all four of them really have their like approach and their style. And yeah, I think Gearbox have done a really good job with the characters that they've created, both that you play as and also play with. The campaign is also quite good, I'd say. It was nice to play through, the options to go to different zones instead of just kind of go through the story in a linear approach. Some of the side quests that I've done have been really like good. Seeing there's a quest where you're essentially trying to find like a serial killer, and I think there's multiple parts that sort of take you all around the world to work out who this guy is. I've only done like the first part, so I'm not going to spoil too much, but it's a quest in the Fade Fields that it's definitely worth doing, because it's like, okay, this is kind of like interesting that it's not just one quest, one and done, that there's a little bit more to it. I also think that the campaign and the story gives you a bunch of new characters that are really great. new villains that I think was Gearbox playing it safe for a lot of it. It's the same with the humor. It's not like they're trying to have a laugh a minute moments, which is what they've said in interviews. But there is an element where it's like I feel like you're playing this a little bit too safe with the bosses and the enemies that you've created. But I guess it's better to have them be a little bit like, yeah, they're okay, than just overbearing like the twins were in 3, you know? But characters like Rush and Laverne, the augurs and stuff, they're all like great characters to introduce. And it was also nice to see some of the older cast show up again, like we have seen a bit of Amara and Zane. And I'd say, again, without trying to spoil anything, how some of those characters interact with each other is some of the stuff that I just wish we had a little bit more of in 3. It makes the world of difference, and seeing some of those characters bounce off of each other was genuinely something I adored, and I hope that they do more. I also wanted to shout out the enemy variety, because having like the order minions, having some of the wildlife, I guess is what you would call it, more focus on like the Violicta enemies and stuff and the Rippers. The faction stuff is cool. Seeing the factions fight amongst each other just in the seamless world stuff is also like really great. And just the different types, similar to Wonderlands, right, where it felt that there was more minions that were potentially just had shield health, or instead of it just being shield health and then normal health, that they had armor health and then it went into shield health. So not only was it cool for a variety to fight different types of enemies, but different types of elemental affinities with armor with shield. So it meant that you had to be pretty quick on changing which element you're using. As you get into the higher difficulties, element multipliers and stuff matter a lot more. So it definitely keeps you on your feet without feeling just a chore to switch stuff around. Made it just a lot more engaging than I think even previous games had with some of their fighting. One of the other things that I really liked about this game that requires a bit more explaining is the damage formula for the weapons, guns, stuff like that. In previous games, a lot of the damage formula stuff was multiplicative. So what I mean by that is if you had a gun that did 100 damage and you had 30% weapon damage on top of that, and then you had 30% element damage, or maybe you have a kill skill. It's like once you get a kill, it increases your weapon damage by 30%. That would count as conditional and another part of the formula. And they basically times by each other, which means that you can get some pretty big numbers just off the damage formula alone without having crazy numbers stacked on top of your like, actual stats. In this game, it looks like, at the very least, the smart, nerdy people will tell me I'm wrong or confirm it when they get their hands on it, that the damage formula is additive now. So what that means is it's a lot more simple to understand where your damage is coming from, where you need to put modifiers into, but also that these numbers aren't going to compound in a crazy way, kind of like it did for Moe's and stuff like Eraser Zane. There's the part of like double dipping as well, where so if you fire a projectile and you have those talents that like if you fire a projectile, there's a chance that it fires off a bigger projectile doing X% of the damage. The problem with those skills in previous games is it would go through the formula, the damage formula for the first shot, and then it would have this new projectile, and then it would go for the damage formula again, which again makes it compound and you get those big explosive damage numbers that you'd see in previous games. I don't know if that's really as present. I don't know if double dipping is a thing, but the fact that the damage formula is like additive means it's a lot more straightforward to understand, and you don't have talents just kind of break the game for you. There probably is talents to still break the game for you, but it does feel like, from what I can at least work out as a pretty big idiot, that the damage formula is a lot less outrageous, which is good, I guess, if you don't want to have those talents that just kind of overtake the game. But it might be bad if you want a more like complex damage number formula, more so than X plus Y plus Z. Another thing I like, the new item slots. I really like ordnance instead of a grenade slot. I think that it's a really smart change. There's some ordnances that I like more than others, and typically I just never really cared for like grenades anyway, outside of using them as like anointments and stuff in previous games. Like I mostly played Zane, right? So I never really got to just use my grenade. I used 2 abilities instead. So yeah, here it was like really nice that you can have a rocket launcher or throwing knives or just something sort of in between, I would say. Enhancements, I don't know if I've made up my mind about them really. Like they're okay, but if there was a chance to have it tie into like I miss melee weapons from Wonderlands. I understand why they're not in this game because it's just more stuff to animate. But even like the spell slot, I suppose too. But I guess that's what Ordnance is supposed to be. It's just all right, I suppose. It's not super interesting. Some of the stats that it gives you, because it's like increases SMG magazine size, are a little bit too like niche and specific. But it's kind of nice when it all lines up and gives you like a really like cool build. But like it's okay, I guess. It's nice to have it and not have it, but I don't know if like a cooler, more interesting slot could be there. But I do think that all of like the perks and the parts on various guns is a really cool feature. The fact that you can have a TDO gun with a Jacobs part on it, which means that if you get a headshot, it critically hits multiple enemies because it ricochets. I think that that change in Borderlands 3 was a really smart one, that the guns themselves, the manufacturers had these kind of like interesting, unique traits. And the fact that you can have these traits intermingle in different types of guns. It also means that some of the traits from previous games, like Atlas and Children of the Vault, do exist in this game too, which is good for guns like Atlas, where you do have some cool effects, but it's not like most Atlas guns were just kind of useless, you know what I mean? So the fact that you can kind of have Atlas on all sorts of other types of guns that you want to be using, like Jacobs, like TDO, like Vladov, yeah, that feels really nice. It feels like the sort of perfect mix of having them, but not them being overbearing and just kind of fluff, useless stuff. The firmware stuff is also kind of useful. I wouldn't say that I like this a huge amount. I think it's just like a cool thing that they've added. But I think with firmware in particular as well is this feels like a sort of Path of Exile seasonal thing almost, that you could build upon it in the future if Gearbox wanted to. You could take it out and change it for something else. I'm not saying that that's the plan for Gearbox. It seems that firmware is like here to stay for the game's lifespan. But these kind of things do give you freedom and foundations to build off of them in the future to make more complex and just engaging systems when people have kind of worked out how good firmware is. I also think that just some firmware is going to be better than others, so it becomes a little bit of a, okay, you just get these free and this too, and you're set for whatever. And the last thing I really wanted to highlight as a good thing is just the guns, like the gear, the legendaries too. It feels like the legendaries still have that uniqueness to them, where it's like, okay, yeah, you get this gun, this feels really good. You want to just make a build around it for whatever Vault Hunter you're on. But they don't show up too often, they're not over present, and it feels like they drop at around the right level, especially if we've got Pearlescence heading into the game in the future. It took me 12 and a half hours, I think, of playing the game before I got my first legendary. However, the legendary I got is a dislike, and I want to touch on that in a second. But now that I move on to the stuff that I didn't really like as much about the game, or just would want it to be improved, or at least have some more information on it, the elephant in the room is performance. Performance was talked about a lot going into like the actual launch of the game, and as somebody that I have an Alienware X15 laptop that I've been playing off of, which isn't ideal. It's got like a 30 series graphics card. Its CPU is the recommended one, like 12700 or whatever it is, but it has 16 gig of RAM, and performance was tough. It was like long, like loading screens to get into the game, constant freezes, constant crashes, just frame rate dropping. Never seemed to get over like a 60 at any point from playing the game, and it really tested my laptop's like fans for sure with how hot it was getting. However, since the day one like patch, or the pre-building patch, I suppose, that we had, and then also certainly the NVIDIA drivers, performance has been a lot better. It's not been super amazing, completely fixed for me, but I also do want to like say, you know, this is something that I struggled with, but also I am playing on a laptop, you know, my experience is going to be different to yours if you're playing on a proper rig. So it's something that to bear in mind, and I want to be like honest about. But things have improved a lot with the game since the patches that have come through. I think overall my biggest gripe with it is when you have all of the settings, and as somebody that's moderately literate on GPU settings and stuff like that, it's a lot of information to try and take in. And as with any optimizing your performance in a game, there's a lot of just trialing and testing stuff. However, because you're in this like big open world, it's hard to know whether the performance dipping is because of like your setup, like the settings that you've changed, or whether it's because the world is still sort of loading and preloading things in a particular way. Like when you load up the game for the first time, it doesn't matter on your PC. I think it's going to be chugging hard, but I would say like ride the wave out if you can, and especially when you go from one part of the world to another. That's when performance could start dipping too, whilst it's obviously loading in these other big sections of the map. Like it makes sense, but it's a case of, is the performance on me or is it on the world? And then obviously you've got all of the stuff with like the like resolution changes, all of this DLSS and all that. And then when you've got all of the different versions for like Intel, AMD, Epic, NVIDIA, all having their own systems for that kind of stuff, it's a little bit much, I think, for little Timmy to log on to Borderlands 4 and be like, okay, which settings should I be using? I would like in the settings for when you're putting stuff on low and high, if they just say like this greatly helps performance, this doesn't do much with performance kind of stuff. I mean, lots of games kind of do that, just showing if you change the occlusion settings down to low, this is going to really help with performance, or it should do. But there isn't just much information in the actual like setting screen or what can be helpful. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the legendaries again. Like I said, it took me 12.5 hours to get a legendary, my first one from like playing the game, and it was off one of the like story bosses. The first legendary I got, and in fact 3 of the first legendaries that I got whilst playing this game were class mods for other Vault Hunters that weren't RAFA. That sucks so badly. If you're going to reduce how often legendaries drop in this game, can you please reduce the chance that I could get class mods for other characters? Because yeah, whilst it's easier to level up another character because you could just skip the campaign once you beat it on 1 to just get a level 30 HARLOWE or whatever, it's still not nice, you know? If it is a case of you going, oh, we don't want to just overburden you with legendaries, don't give me ones I can't use, please. Like, that just makes me sad. And in fact, the first legendary that I could use didn't drop for me. It was just in the shop. So yeah, like thinking back, like that doesn't feel good. Maybe there is like a smaller chance to get class mods for other Vault Hunters, but I was just super unlucky. One other thing that was a bit frustrating for me to deal with was some of the weird leveling scaling when you're like out in the world doing stuff, especially after the campaign. I tried working this out a little bit more as to why, and I think I know why it's the case, but sometimes you might fight certain enemies in an area, you know, you're doing like a quest and stuff that's at your level. Even if you're on Ultra Vault Hunter mode 1, it might be 1 level above you, 2 levels above you, but not too outrageous. And then you like go to an area that's literally next door in the same zone, but just a mob pretty much 50, 100 meters away from you. And they are out leveled. Like you can't even see what level they are. It just has like the icon saying that, yeah, they're probably like 5, 6 levels above you. If you fight them, you're going to struggle. And a lot of the time it was like, I don't understand why that's the case. If, for example, you go into World of Warcraft, you're leveling in Island Forest, Red Ridge Mountains, sort of level 20 stuff. If you step out of line and you end up in like the Blasted Lands, Burning Steppes, you'll see like a level 50 enemy that will just one-shot you. But it's very clear to see like, hey, you've gone into a new zone, you've gone into a new area that's a little bit more dangerous, and you're not ready for this. So if you run into it, you're going to just die. It's very clear to see that like you've gone somewhere you shouldn't be at that point. Here, because it is just the same zone, and even like minions are somewhat close by, it's like if the game would explain to me why suddenly these guys over here are out of my like level reach, and what can I do to alleviate that? Should I come back later? Is this just something weird that's happening? And what I think it is because one of the things to unlock the higher Ultra Vault Hunter modes is beating some of the bosses in certain zones. I think it's essentially like if you have a world boss in an area that's on the right area of Fade Fields, for example, all of the enemies in that zone are going to be too high a level, which kind of makes sense. But like, can you tell me that please, like on the UI, on the map anywhere, if there's certain areas of the Fade Fields or the other areas of the map that I shouldn't be going to because it's out of my level and just everything's very hard, I'd like to know that before I try and travel there. Because one thing that I've tried to do whilst like leveling these characters up after the campaign is just like completing various areas, you know, like completing the bottom left-hand corner of the Fade Fields where you start the game and then kind of working my way across. But yeah, sometimes you'll just run into fights and areas and bosses that are just out of your depth, really, and there's no reason as to why that's the case. For example, I thought it might be because there's like vault key fragments in these areas that it really doesn't want you to do the vaults on like the Ultra Vault Hunter modes because they're supposed to be a lot harder. So where these vault fragments are, there's going to be harder enemies to fight, so it kind of deters you. But so I did this. I got the fragments, went to try out the vault, and the vault was at my level. So it's again, it's one of those like make up your mind, or at least tell me what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing, what are you trying to push me towards, what are you saying you should come back and do this later. Because at this point in time, I can't make sense of it. Another thing about I dislike it, and I would say I dislike it a lot, but like leveling after the campaign ends does get very slow. It might be just based on what kind of content you end up doing. Like if you are in the world trying to do various things of like unlocking silos, unlocking safe houses, doing quests here or there, it doesn't feel like you get a good like XP per hour of just kind of seeing what's around in the world and such. But yeah, sometimes it's like you feel like you've done a lot and then you look at your XP bar and it's barely moved for whatever reason. But I feel like once people work out how to sort of exploit the system, doing the same quest over and over again. Also, replaying missions is a really nice thing. I really like that. Yeah, it feels very like a bit of a trek, I suppose, but it is just kind of that leveling process. And if it forces you to do all sorts of different stuff, it would be nice again if I could like level and try to unlock the higher modes of Ultra Vault Hunter, especially now that like playing AMON, which is a lot of the gameplay in the background, doing that kind of stuff is a lot easier, and I want to test against the high difficulty and a lot more stuff. Probably get more XP from doing stuff as well. It's hard when every mob that you fight is 6 levels higher than you. So I haven't quite made up my mind on like how I feel about leveling. In the early game, it feels great because you level up super quickly, but just at a point, it feels like you hit literally like WoW Classic level 50 to level 60. It's just a slog. One thing I did want to talk about, and I don't know again if this is worth making another video on because it's kind of hard to explain, but like I don't like the skill trees that much for the characters. Like I like that there's more talent options. I like all of the augments, the capstones, how it branches off. But the problem I think with having more options is that some of the talents and the trees themselves homogenize into each other. So instead of, say, for Amara, I could think of the Fist of the Elements tree. I haven't played Amara in ages, but you know, a lot more like element focused damage, having some of that damage transferred to other people. You have the Brawl tree, which is like melee, and then is it Mystical Assault, the blue tree, where you have like Rush. And you have the rush stacks and you build around that. I could sort of sum up in a sentence what those builds are mainly focused on. Not exclusively, but like what the general gist is of each of those trees from like the main game. Here I couldn't do that with some of the cast. Like Vex is an easy one because you've got Vescalation, kinetic damage, the bleed damage, the build that like Moxie's shown off recently. That sort of stands out a lot more as something that you can do. You can do other stuff as well within that Vescalation tree. But like for AMON and HARLOWE, without mentioning the abilities themselves, it is hard to tell you like in a sentence what those trees want to be focusing on more than the others. For example, for AMON, you have got the Calamity tree, which is more like melee focused and fire damage, but you do have melee talents in the Cybernetics tree. You do have fire talents across all 3 of the trees. So it doesn't feel like Calamity, Scourge, and Cybernetics, outside of the actual skill actions themselves, that there's enough to identify of like, if you want to play this way, then you go for this skill tree. I think that's kind of the point. Borderlands has in the past had a big issue with some skill trees being a bit too defining for characters, that you can only play them in one way. For example, Gauge Anarchy, it feels like really that's the only build that you're sort of pushed towards. Outside of like other options, you can play other options, obviously, play whatever the hell you want, but that really, if you want to be pushing the end game, that you get forced into playing a certain talent tree in a certain way. It feels that Gearbox are trying to avoid that, but I feel like a little bit of the identity of some of the trees outside of the action skills themselves are just lacking a little bit more. I don't know how to describe it outside of that. I'll probably need a few more examples, but I hope that makes some form of sense. Couple of things I dislike too, like there's no photo mode in the game currently, which is kind of sad, but makes sense. There's no training dummy. I can't find one anywhere. That would be really helpful to try and test like damage formula stuff instead of have to run out into the world and try and take screenshots whilst I'm headshotting a mauler whilst it's killing me. It's not ideal, but we get by. There's some interactions as well with the game where, for example, the main one is like if you're in fight for your life and you get brought out of it because you get a second wind. I'd like if there was a little bit of an invulnerable phase whilst you're getting up, because the amount of times that I've brought myself up and then instantly been knocked down because there's enemies meleeing me and stood on me that I can't do anything about it. That would be nice, because yeah, some of those fights just descend into you come back up with second wind, you get brought back down instantly, and there's not really too much that you can do. Damage indicators in some fight as well. There are like these damage indicators that you might see, like the blue arrow pointing at where the damage is coming from, but it's not nearly as like noticeable as other games. Just thinking of, I think Destiny had a really good system of just showing you kind of where you got hit from damage, and so that feels like it's just annoying more than anything. Vile enemies, which are kind of like the anointed enemies of this game, annoying. I don't know if it's a case of like I just dislike them. They are meant to be tougher enemies to fight and a bit more of a pain, because they have these like crystallized sections that you need to break before you can actually do damage to them. And if you're not really running a accurate gun, you just kind of have to throw any ordnance or any like big blast damage at it to break it. It can just be super frustrating. Some of the modifiers on enemies as well can be really irritating, like the Century Petal one, the like singularity every time they die. When you run into some like missions where everybody's got that as a modifier, you're running into like mayhem mode issues. I'd say that it's never really hit that level of annoying that like mayhem modifiers had in Borderlands 3. But just sometimes you run into just a bad mix of modifiers, like regenerating, elemental eaters, and you're running like AMON, so everything you do is like elemental damage. It's tricky, but I think that's kind of the point. You want to run into some enemies that frustrate you because they're a challenge and you usually get more for it. Whilst I like all of the different manufacturers and stuff, I don't really like the auto guns that much. The ones where you have to like hold the button down and then fire like it's a railgun. Sometimes it feels good depending on the gun, but most are just like, I get like a sniper rifle, I just sell it instantly. I just don't want to deal with it. I don't like it too much outside of other options, but I guess that's just more preference than anything. And whilst I did say that like I like the open world side of stuff, I do miss some of the sectioned level areas, because you had like more iconic names and places, like Jacob's Manor. I used to hate that zone really, but I know what it's called. I know where it is. I know what's in there. I couldn't tell you what the zone is that you fight like the first boss in, right? It's in my mind. I can picture it, or like Horace's area. Like, I know what it looks like, but I couldn't tell you what it's called. I couldn't tell you some of the stuff that's around it, because it all just sort of blends into one a little bit when it's all on one big map. Also, yeah, the UI for the weapons and stuff is a little bit annoying to deal with. What's annoying is like going into the menus, sorting out the weapons from like damage per second to just see what kind of like damage these guns could do. Having all of these filters on and changing it a certain way, and then equipping a gun that you want, and then you go out of the menu, you go back into it, and it resets. I'd love the option to like, can I just keep this filter as the default every single time I go into the menu? Because it would just save so much like faff. And that's it, I think. There's probably more I could talk about, but I kind of want to keep the video relatively short for what it is. Like I said, this isn't really too much of a review. It's just more, this is stuff that I took notes for as I was playing the game, and just kind of wanted to talk about my thoughts. Overall, I think that this game is really good. It's hard for me to gauge whether it's like amazing, you know what I mean? I enjoyed playing through the game and the story multiple times, more so than Borderlands 3, and there's more for me to do in this game than any other one. I feel like I've scratched the surface, and this game's going to give you like hours upon hours of doing stuff. What endgame is going to be like, I don't know. I've seen glimpses, I've tried glimpses. It seems pretty cool, but it feels like with this game, when people start learning which guns, which builds, and which leveling routes, and which things are worth doing, once those knowledge checks come in and the game feels like it gets found out a bit, I don't know whether that's going to make the game better or whether it's going to really hamper how fun it's been for me to just play through. But it's made me very curious to keep an eye on what's going to happen with Borderlands 4 in the future. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I appreciated you guys listening to me all the way till the end. Like and subscribe. I should have more Borderlands 4 content coming after launch as well for various things. And until next time, take care, and I'll see you then.